Destiny 2 The Final Shape has been out for a little while now, and now that I've been able to sink my teeth into everything offered, I figured it's about time I talk about it. Spoilers for literally all of the things. Please click off if you care about spoilers. First, I think it's important to talk about my expectations before the Final Shape launched. Before the April showcase, I was not sold on the expansion in any capacity. Lightfall killed any hope I had of Bungie closing out the narrative in a satisfying way because of the tone-deaf mess of a campaign where the entire plot became about the new subclass instead of, stopping Callus and the Witness from doing whatever it is they wanted to do. I mean, hell. We learned what the Veil was, that cutscene that was released 5 months after launch. While the Year 6 seasonal content was at its peak gameplay-wise, the story was not, and at some point I just stopped caring. I felt no reason to play, the loot grind wasn't all that great, and the story, the one consistent thing Witch Queen in its year of content had, was not doing it for me. It felt more like ping-ponging around different people, being told, oh, I actually don't have what you want, but in your next character here does, instead of actually making progress towards our goal. After the layoffs at Bungie, I decided I'd had enough. I'd set my mind on not buying the Final Shape and just watching it on YouTube or something. One day, on a whim, a friend of mine showed me the April showcase because he saw that Luke Smith, the previous game director with wonderful ideas like removing supers and sunsetting exotics, was in it. This was a mistake, however, because they also revealed the new prismatic subclass and exotic class items. To be honest, I was kind of sold on it then and there. I was cautious with it because I know Bungie's marketing team is really good, but I was still sold on the expansion nonetheless. The same day as the showcase, a major content update dropped as well, named Into the Light, which turned out to be really promising. That sucked me back into the game, fully preparing me for what was to come. June 4th finally came around, and it might have been the most hyped day to be a Destiny player. I felt like marketing really ramped up after April, and Into the Light brought a lot of goodwill back to the player base. With everything set for a successful launch, what could possibly go wrong? Enter the plague of Destiny 2. Server issues. It's no secret that something went horribly wrong with the rollout of the expansion, as numerous people couldn't play for most of the day, and it even rivaled Shadowkeep's launch issues back in 2019, which is genuinely something I never thought they'd ever do again. Couple this with the 25-hour downtime the day prior, and people were not happy. It wasn't a great launch, but once everything calmed down, most complaints subsided very quickly. Once I was able to actually play the game, I was immediately blown away. Seeing those first few cutscenes, especially the one of the Witness actually enacting the Final Shape for a moment, and the transitional cutscene from the purple portal area to the grassy plains of the Pale Heart, made me feel something I hadn't felt in this game before. Progressing through that first mission was surreal, and that feeling only escalated once I unlocked Prismatic on the first mission. Woo! Yeah! Suck it, Stasis and Strand. The cutscenes after the first mission were great too, fully selling me on Cade 6's inclusion, something I was very iffy on. After this, we spent the first half of the campaign getting the gang back together, which I really appreciated. I've always felt like the Vanguard, especially Zavala, were the weakest link in the main story. Cade was the exception, but he was killed off in Forsaken. Ikora had some moments in the past, think Season 8, Season 15, and Witch Queen, but outside of that, I felt like she just kind of stood around and talked sometimes. Zavala felt like he didn't even exist prior to the Kaido storyline, but he's had more spotlight in recent years. And speaking of Zavala, this is the first time we get to hear his new voice actor, Keith David, and I think he does a phenomenal job. His voice is quite different from what Lance Reddick did for the character and will definitely take some getting used to, but I think he landed his first impression well. The visuals of the Pale Heart are top-notch, potentially making it my new favorite destination. I love the very clear progression path of the campaign, starting out normal with all this greenery, and as we move closer to the Witness, things get more and more messed up. More hand structures start appearing, things seem to be breaking apart more, and we finally hit the monolith where the environmental design peaks. We get closer to that Final Shape look of things, and it's just so well done. I know the art team always does a great job, but this just felt like they cranked the dial up to 11, and I'm all here for it. As a result, the campaign takes a more linear approach to progression, and while that makes it the least Destiny-like campaign, I think it was for the best. I believe there's only one moment of backtracking, but the game spawns you in the area you need to be in anyway, so it's not really a major problem, especially because you don't unlock fast travel until you complete the 7th mission. The difficulty of the Legend campaign experience definitely kicked my ass a few times. Now granted, I've not soloed the other 2 Legend campaigns, so I don't have the best point of reference here, but I definitely got stuck on some encounters at times. The 3-player experience didn't feel as hard as Witch Queen's, but it was definitely harder than what Lightfall offered. In terms of the actual level design, I think this is the best it's ever been, and I was in love with every arena. All the boss arenas were greatly designed, with a lot of the standard enemy encounters being more open and forcing more cover play than usual. And hey, speaking of enemies, we finally got a new enemy race with the Dread, and I genuinely cannot imagine this expansion without them. We're introduced to them almost as soon as we enter the Pale Heart, and they become a mainstay very quickly. They're annoying as hell to fight, but in a fun kind of way, unless you're in the raid, but more on that later. The story is about, you guessed it, preventing the final shape from happening. The first half is more about putting the Vanguard back together, as mentioned earlier, but I thoroughly enjoyed seeing the Vanguard in the spotlight. Zavala not only having this crisis fate that was they got so long ago, but also losing his light in order to gain the knowledge needed to destroy the Witness was really great to experience. I've always wanted more for his character, and so I'm happy he finally has the spotlight. Ikora felt more of the same as she was in Witch Queen, so no complaints there. Cade's inclusion was definitely interesting. He not only got to see how his best friends have changed since his death, but also their reactions to seeing him alive again, and if I'm being honest, him and Crow steal the show at times, especially in a post-campaign mission I'll talk about later. Targe was a character we've known about but rarely seen, much less heard, and yet, despite his short screen time, I empathized with Zavala when he died. Hearing the Witness try to coerce us to its side was neat. It was done with the whole hijacking our ghost thing and started talking to us directly, manifesting what it believes we want within the Pale Heart. We also learned a lot about the Witness throughout the journey too, stuff that really should have been in Lightfall. Learning that it's the amalgamation of an entire civilization that wants to make the Traveler pay for leaving it after they tried to bring the Veil of Darkness, equivalent to the Traveler, to it in order to make it give the universe a purpose in its vision, which is of course the titular final shape. Meanwhile, we've been talking to the Darkness statues that we've seen around the solar system before, eventually revealed to be dissenters within the Witness, and they tell us how to defeat it, by heading to the place where the Witness was born, now manifested inside the Pale Heart thanks to the Traveler's Light, and unmaking the Witness by destroying enough dissenters to weaken it, which was just absolutely insane. We actually even lose to the Witness in the campaign. It kicks us out of the ritual site before we can do enough damage to it, and also leads directly into the raid, which I'm not quite sure if it has been done before. In the raid Salvation's Edge, we finally travel into the monolith that's been towering over the skybox all this time and confront the Witness for the second to last time, essentially severing its connection to the Traveler's Light, allowing it to help us once more. Everything ends with the franchise's first ever 12-player activity, Excision, which sees us destroying enough dissenters to weaken the Witness further, allowing us to channel the Traveler's Light through our ghost and putting an end to the Witness once and for all. It's genuinely incredible. Bungie, managed to make the ending super satisfying for everybody, and even got me a little emotional at the end of it all, something I never expected going into this. Next up, I want to talk about the raid, since it directly correlates with the story. Salvation's Edge might be my new favorite raid in the entire franchise, going neck and neck with Witch Queen's Valve the Disciple. I thought the mechanics were really great in forcing people to actually know their roles. The enemy density was really well done, and this is also where the dread peaked for me, in both how fun they are to fight, and how annoying they are to fight. The combat difficulty has been really fun to play, and the chaos of it all is something I've missed, especially since the last non-reprisal raid was Root of Nightmares. I do not have enough words in my vocabulary to describe how disappointing that raid was. The fourth encounter, Verity, was the most unique and insane counter that's been designed, and I'm absolutely in love with it. Having your ghost shell and fashion matter in an encounter is something I never thought I'd see. Hell, having spectating being a core mechanic in the encounter is insane enough, but on top of that, the dissect mechanic being as complicated as it is, and the splitting of teams just makes for a perfect encounter. The final encounter, however, I don't have as many praises to sing as the rest of the raid. It's the only encounter where you can have half the team doing ad clear and still succeed, something that isn't possible in any other encounter up to this point, barring some insane luck and Verity. I do like the DPS phase though. Forcing people to move around and jump during damage is a really nice way to spice things up over the typical just stand in the spot and do damage phases. I also like that all the wipe timers in the encounters relate to the final shape in some way. It gives a good sense of urgency, like, oh shit, if we fail this, it's over. The scale of the entire raid was really well done on top of the visual design. You're in such massive spaces, but it feels so well paced it's a little insane. Excision is the first 12-player activity in the franchise, and it's probably the coolest part of the entire expansion, which is a really high bar considering how much great content is here. I do feel like the player count is unnecessary on normal mode, but it's cool, so who really cares? Bungie did release a Grandmaster mode, and it sounds about as insane as you think it is, although the rewards for doing it aren't really that desirable, and it makes it feel more like something you do once and then never again. Before I end this segment on the campaign, I just want to touch on the music a little bit. It's unfortunate that a few of the big name composers got laid off before this, but they knocked it out of the park for this expansion, especially for the last couple of cutscenes. The music is always fantastic, but this time just felt extra special. I'm not a big Destiny 1 nostalgia lord or anything, but hearing them remix bits from D1's music into the tracks was just really nice to hear. The cutscenes you get after Excision also have really great music, using a lot of leitmotifs from the series' history, even calling so far back and using part of the hope from Music of Spheres. The cutscenes and everything that happened were really great on its own, but the music really helps settle in the mood and tone of everything. After completing Mission 7, you gain access to free roam on the Pale Heart, meaning you can finally start doing all of the other things this expansion has to offer, which is a lot. Let's get into that, because I haven't yapped enough for my own liking. First up, Prismatic. Prismatic's unlock system is nowhere near as horrible as the Darkness subclasses were, and if it was, I wouldn't be able to take it anymore. You unlock some of Prismatic during the campaign, with 3 hidden fragments if you can find them, but most of the fragment unlocks will come from chests that you find in the open world. Most of these chests have their own unique mechanics in order to unlock them, which is really neat, but I think the cherry on top is your fragment unlocks are an account wide. Thank you, Bungie, for not pulling a strand and making me grind the fragments 3 separate times. You unlock the rest of your abilities to the Destined Heroes post-campaign quest, which is character-specific. However, completing this quest on one character auto-completes it for your account, meaning once you hop on your alternative characters, all you have to do is launch these adventures from the old tower, social space thing, and you're good to go. On to Prismatic itself. This might be the most broken subclass we've had, unless you play Titan. Warlocks get to run around with 3 little buddies, and Hunters are over here doing some of the best single target damage in the game with the Nighthawk Golden Gun and Stillhun, and Titans get punch and all different flavors. Hopefully Bungie gives Titans some love, because Prismatic is so much fun on the other classes. The new supers and aspects are pretty good, unless your name's Unbreakable. Warlocks get D1 Radiance back in the form of Song of Flame, which supercharges you and your allies' abilities while augmenting your own. During the super, you get an upgraded version of Incinerator Snap and a new grenade that I don't think has a name, but is basically a tracking ball of fire that does some good damage. This super might be the best of the 3 because not only does it give you a whopping 90% damage resistance and 30% damage resist to your allies, but also has the capability of just constantly stunning bigger enemies with the constant ignitions you'll be pulling off. Helion, the new aspect for Solar Warlocks, is also really good. It summons a Solar Soul that shoots out balls of flames that are just a really good source of passive damage. Hunters get Storm's Edge for their super, which was surprisingly fun. It was really fun to just ping-pong between enemy formations with that, seeing the cool animations and the really good sound design as everything in your path just ceases to exist. Ascension is the art aspect that goes along with it, and it's also surprisingly fun, giving on-demand amplified and anything to make platforming sectors easier is always a good thing, especially since you can pair it with Grapple on Prismatic. This thing I kind of clowned on before launch and never really thought it'd be good, and then I actually got to use it and I'm like, yeah, this thing's pretty fun. Titans get Twilight Arsenal, which pre-launch was my favorite of the 3 new supers, throwing 3 mega void axes at enemies, and being able to pick up those axes afterwards looks really cool. It still is, don't get me wrong, but I think something like Song of Flame has stolen the spotlight from me, because I totally don't main Warlock or anything. Unbreakable is a new void aspect that goes along with it, and it sure does exist. Sacrificing your grenade for a dinky shield that most enemies will just counter it anyway was a choice ever. Really cool in theory, just not that great in execution. There's 3 exotics for you to earn, and they're probably the best expansion exotics we've done in a long while. However, I want to talk about Tessellation real quick, even though it was the pre-order exotic, and I don't believe it's available for people who didn't pre-order, but it technically is a final shape exotic. It's a really fun exotic that has the extreme niche of turning your grenades into a big explosion, which is really nice for something like Solar, where you can run both a healing grenade and Tessellation, which allows your grenade to do damage, even if it won't count as grenade damage. At least I don't think it does. On to actual exotics introduced in final shape. I want to start with Still Hunt, since its mission is part of the post-campaign quest. Still Hunt is basically Golden Gun, the gun. It is insanely good because of it, allowing prismatic hunters to basically just one-shot almost anything with it. It's kind of insane. The exotic mission is really fun too, giving us more of Cade and Crow screen time, which I'm all here for because wow, these characters, I didn't even know that I wanted them to interact, and now I wish they interacted more. Kvasov is next, and oh man how I miss this gun. It was the one exotic I wanted back from D1, even though I knew it wouldn't return in its original form. However, the new form of it is really good, even launching with a stability bug that Bungie has since patched but buffed the stability to bring that sort of level back. The main gimmick is, what if we gave ricochet rounds tracking, and while it sounds lame on paper, on execution this thing shreds enemies. That on top of its ability to loop into itself with siphon mods and shoot to loot to pick up orbs at a range, and you have yourself the de facto ad clear exotic primary. Shame the quest was, or is, bugged? I'm not sure, but it's worth the pain of doing the assists for this weapon, trust me. Microcosm is the weapon team's attempt to implement the Traveler's Beam from Lightfall's opening cutscene into a weapon, and I think it feels really good. The marketing for it was very unfortunate, underselling the weapon to an insane degree. It's the first ever kinetic in the heavy slot, meaning it charges both gauges of prismatic, and is also really great for super regen with its perk, not to mention the extra damage it gets after your super ends, which makes that a really solid option for damage. The co-op focus missions you do to unlock it are really nice too, instead of the typical higher level version of mission with champions that the previous expansions gave us. Ergosum is an exotic sword that was inspired by the Crafting, an event that happened back in August of 2023 where people discovered a bug where you could put intrinsic traits or weapon perks on weapons that did not have them normally. Ergosum not only rolls all 3 light elements but also has 5 different frames it can roll and 8 different exotic perks, meaning this thing's a beast. It's also the first ever special ammo sword, which is definitely unique and highlights just how fun swords are, but they unfortunately take up the heavy slot. Euphony is the raid exotic, and I haven't been able to mess with it much, but from what I have, it gives Strand Warlock a really solid damage rotation, utilizing an exotic helmet I never thought I'd see used anywhere when in Apotheosis Veil. Probably really good on higher end stuff too, with threadling spawning fairly often from this weapon, and their damage buffs your damage. It also might be the coolest looking raid exotic, up there with something like Conditional Finality from Root of Nightmares. In terms of the legendary weapons, the Pale Heart weapons are really good, especially the new Strand Rocket Sidearm. This thing was glued to my hand during my original campaign run, along with Red Death. We got some new archetypes too, like the Healing Auto, the 600 RPM machine gun, and the Wave Sword Frame, just to name a few. No hesitation, the new Healing Auto rifle is everything I've ever wanted in a support weapon, coupled with the changes to the UI to show ally health bars, and that just makes me very happy as a support player. Raid weapons are fairly solid too, with a sniper probably rising to be my favorite one so far. Full Destiny unlocked at the second reset of the expansion, and is how you obtain the exotic class items, and it might just be the best exotic mission they've ever made. It feels like a 2-player raid where both players have to communicate, and I'm absolutely in love with it. It's a shame it receives so much backlash because people don't want to find another person to run it with, but I sincerely hope that these kind of missions get made again, because it was really fun to figure out the first time, especially once me and my friends sorted out our miscommunication in one of the rooms. The exotic class items are farmable from these missions and chests on the Pale Heart, and are a similar concept to Ergosum. They're able to roll diet versions of other exotic perks, and even roll with perks that are from exotics that aren't from your class. These are pretty vital in prismatic build crafting, although with the double loot cheese being patched, the farm isn't as fun for these anymore. I hope Bungie iterates on this idea and gives us more in the future, as well as a better method to farm them, because this is a really fun concept that should definitely be expanded on. Finally, the exotic armor piece acquisition was changed in final shape, with it coming from a special focusing tab in Raul's vendor screen instead of solo lost sectors, which I'm honestly not the biggest fan of, especially with exotics getting artifice slots, which, like the special focusing, requires ciphers, which is a very scarce material at the moment. Not to mention, in order to get the special focusing, you need to fully reset his rank, which just feels not great. On to the actual exotic armor pieces, I've only messed around with about half of them, and they're really good. Speaker side allows me to become even more of a support player than I already could be, and it's absolutely beautiful. Matadoxia is one I haven't messed around with that much, but my good friend on screen reviewed it for me so I can be lazy. Hazardous propulsion allows me to be Explodey Boy, and it's great. Wishful ignorance exists for some reason because Trantine wasn't broken enough. Granted, I haven't tried it out in group content, but luckily my good friend reviewed it for me so I can, yet again, be lazy. Gifted Conviction is a chess piece that I thought was gonna be a meme, and it totally is, but I'm in love with it. It's so dumb, but in a great way. Balance of Power is an exotic. It sure does exist and does a thing. Here are my friend's thoughts on it. The final shape, like in expansion, came with some sweeping quality of life changes, and some of them are great, and some need more work. First, the power grind is only 100 levels this time around, which I'm very grateful for, because wow, the pinnacle grind still sucks. Hashtag forever 1999. Account-wide power is another component that I think makes the pinnacle grind less horrible, as you can essentially power level a character that you've ignored. Fireteam power is also a great change, since I can do random loadouts and raids and not be totally throwing. We got 2 more loadout slots, which was nice, but I do wish we had more. Mod icons got color-coded, which is probably the best quality of life feature they introduced, if I'm being totally honest. Unfortunate that the mod system hasn't been added onto since Season 21, but I'm just too used to Bungie making/overhauling a system and never adding on to it afterwards. The fabled UI rework also happened this expansion, and while I definitely think it's an improvement, it needs more work. We're still limited to only seeing 4 buffs/debuffs on the left side, and with how many things you can activate at once, especially on Prismatic, 4 buff channels just isn't enough anymore. I also think certain things shouldn't take up channels, like anti-champion capabilities or magazine overflow perks. Having raid and dungeon important buffs at the top is nice, and I think doubling the available channels and moving debuffs to the right side would be ideal. Easier said than done, I know, but something needs to be done about it because the game simply has too many things to keep track of at the moment. I also feel like those buffs with high uptime, i.e. armor charge, should have its own buff channel as well so it isn't fighting with everything else. I believe Bungie's talked about some sort of adjustment, so I'm excited to see how that goes. Bungie has decided to rename seasons for some reason, and I still don't understand why. Welcome to Episodes, the new seasonal content model that so far, for 2 launches, is no different than a regular season. So far, it seems to just be more time-gated, but without more content, I can't really give an opinion, but I can at least talk about what we have. Story so far is this: after the Witness's defeat, spoilers by the way, the Traveler releases anomalous matter dubbed Echoes, and one of these lands on Nessus, which starts to make the Vex act strange and transform the planet. So naturally, we go find out what's going on, and we find out there's a new villain in the picture named the Conductor. Who this character is or what their motives are, we don't know because we're not that far in. In terms of activities, we only have 2 so far, Breach Executable and Enigma Protocol. I still haven't done Enigma Protocol, so let's talk about Breach Executable. It feels like another usual seasonal activity. Kill things, pick up drop, bank it, repeat. Enemy density is pretty good, and being on Nessus again is nice because it hasn't really been important since 2021. Weapons around this time are pretty good, but we don't have everything, so it's kinda hard to judge them fully. We got the Return of Red Death, a D1 exotic brought back to life to kill its imposter Crimson. It's pretty neat, definitely the new king of survivability. Alongside that, we got some reprisal weapons from Season of the Dawn, but they left out the one weapon that I wanted back, so that's fun. In terms of the new weapons, the only one I've really used is Lost Signal, the new Area Denial Frame Grenade Launcher. The aesthetics of everything else are cool, but I feel like I've said everything I can without having the full arsenal at my disposal. Also, I know this section isn't about armor, but I just want to shout out the Warlock helmet. Look at this thing. No, seriously. Look at it. It's so dumb looking, but I kinda love it. You can also give it an anime blush, but that's probably cursed knowledge, and it's time to move on. Destiny 2, the final shape, is pretty good, if you didn't catch that yet. There's a lot to like here, and I think it's definitely the best expansion the game has ever seen, surpassing Forsaken. I hope my insane rambles for however long this video is was entertaining. Thanks for watching, stay hydrated, and I'll see you next time.